Test audio. Alrighty. Hello, everybody. All right, I'm just going to give it a few seconds till we get some audio rolling in the background. And let's see. Hopefully, people are listening to us. And it looks like we are. Yes, perfect. So, hello, everybody. My name is Renee. For those who don't know me, I am the Community Outreach Coordinator here at 42 Silicon Valley. Um, those that are watching from outside of 42 and are not students, we are a tuition-free college focused on computer programming. So if you're interested, feel free to check out our website. It's 42.us.org. And we're going to start this presentation. So for those who don't know, this is our monthly Women Speaker Series. For the past 2 years now? 3 years. It's been 3 years. Oh my God, that's so exciting. Um, we've had really amazing speakers. This month, we're very happy to have Belén Cruz. She is the Director of Technology at Latinas in Tech, and she is going to be giving a presentation on how to look for a job during these hard times that we're currently living in right now. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Belén Cruz.
Hi, thanks Renee for inviting me today and for the introduction. So yeah, as he already mentioned, like I'm the director of technology at Latinas in Tech, which is a nonprofit that supports women and Latinas in tech. And then on my day-to-day job, I'm a mobile software engineer. And hopefully in a couple of weeks, I will be starting a new job. Um, and that is what brings me here today because I've been interviewing for the last couple of months and while sheltering at home and while working at home. So I wanted to share my experience doing this with you. Um, as a bit of background, as I said, I'm a mobile engineer, specific for iPhone, for iOS. I'm from Spain and I did my master's. I also did a PhD back in Spain. And I came to the US around almost 6 years ago. I've been working here since I came. I first started with a small startup, then I worked for a bigger company like Groupon. And around July this year, like a couple of months ago, I started looking for a new job. And I finished my round of interviews around 2, 3 weeks ago. So today I want to share with you this journey, some recommendations, the steps, and the last part of the presentation, I want to focus on and discuss what are like the main differences now that we are all working from home and that these interviews are going to be done completely from home. Like what are like the positive things, like the negative aspects, and what you can do to try and improve your experience and your performance during these interviews. Um, all of this is from my personal perspective and my personal experience. I hope that this is could be useful for you. So if we move to the next slide, I want to give like a brief summary, like what are like all these steps. This is like the general process. I guess that no surprises here for you, right? So the first step is to prepare for the interviews. There are I identified like 3 different areas that we need to prepare before doing the interviews. The first is the technical part. Um, I guess this is the one that you are more familiar with. It involves like the studying, coding, and using the tools that you probably already know, right? Like LeetCode or Glassdoor. Another useful tool that I discovered and I didn't know about is Prompt. So if you don't know this tool, you can check it out. It's a platform that pairs you with other people that are also preparing for interviews. So you can practice interviewing each other. So once you interview each other, you need to provide feedback for the other person, and the other person will give you your feedback. So I found it like really, really useful to get some honest feedback, because when you interview with companies, not all of them give you feedback. If they don't want to, like, if you don't pass that interview, they usually don't give you any details about why. Um, so having this tool, getting to interview with another person that is at the same situation than you, and they will give you some honest feedback of how you did, I think that's pretty useful. Um, this tool also give you, like, there are different type of interviews that you can select. You can do a technical one, this system design. You can also do a behavioral interview. I only test, like, I only did technical ones, so I'm not sure how the other works. But for the technical ones, it was like really useful. So a second area that we need to prepare is the communication. Like, the technical part is so obvious, like we all know that we need to prepare that, but sometimes we forget about the communication. And you need to have a good communication to express your ideas, to talk about your code, and talk about your past projects, trying to highlight what are the most important things, like being able to communicate that to the other person. But apart from that, there's this third area that you need to prepare, and that it isn't mentioned that often, and I think it's also really important, and that's the preparation of your documentation or the tools that are going to support you through the process. Um, and I want to focus on this in more detail, since there are usually like less resources about this part, and also because now that all the interviews take place at home, I think this area is even more important. But if you have questions about more about the technical part, feel free to ask me, and I can answer any questions during the QA related to that. So the second step is the interview process. We're gonna start with our process once we feel that we are ready. There is some flexibility to make this work in the best way that is going to adapt to your schedule and your timing. Um, for example, if you feel like really confident and have a clear idea of the companies or types of companies that you are going to be interviewing with, then you can move faster, because you will have a smaller number of companies and, of course, a smaller number of interviews. Um, but for example, if your schedule is really limited, maybe because you are studying or maybe because you're working, then it's more difficult for you to find like time slots for the interviews, so it will take you longer. Or for example, if you want to explore a lot of different options because you are not really sure about the companies that you really like, then you will need to schedule a lot of different interviews, and it will also take you longer. Like, this completely depends on you. Um, yes, apart from this, like, a good idea is to reach the end of your process with more than one option, because this will give you a better idea of your worth. You can compare, and you have like different perspectives. So keep that in mind when you schedule your interviews. Even if you want to move faster or slower, keep in mind that this could be a good thing for you, and how you need to move with the different companies to reach out the end of your process with more than one option. Um, that's related to the third step, which is the negotiation. So this step, once you have passed your interviews, the company will let you know if they want to proceed with an offer or not. And then you can talk with your recruiter about your expectations, conditions, any other terms that are important to you, and then negotiate. Um, that's why it's important to have more than one option, because that's going to help you in this process too. Um, I won't go into detail for this part since I'm not an expert on this. So we will focus first on the preparation and then how the interviews work. So if we move forward to the next slide, focusing on the preparation, as I said, like you probably already know how to prepare for technical interviews, what type of like doing lead code, right, and how to like the different type of exercise that you should be preparing. So I wanted to focus more on this other part, um, that is even more important now that we are working from home. Um, so first of all, it's your resume. Um, your resume and also like your online presence, like your LinkedIn profile, your Twitter profile, things like that. So these are really important because they are the first things that recruiters, the hiring managers, and even the interviewers are going to see about you. So when you send your resume to a recruiter, that resume is like your profile in the interview process. It will be sent to the manager. It will be sent to the people that is going to interview you. I thought in the beginning, I thought that the resume was some kind of something old fashioned, like it was just part of the formal protocol of the interviews, but it's not. At the beginning of an interview, that the experience that I had is that the interviewer is taking a look at your resume and will probably ask you some questions about it, about the projects and your most recent experience. So they're literally going to take a look and they're going to ask you about the things that are seen in your resume. That's why you need to pay attention to this to highlight the things that you consider more relevant for that job. It's not like a matter or feeling like having a lot of information or like a long list of things. It's more important to include information that tells something about you and your experience. So I think that better it's instead of listing like 10 projects, for example, and just mention the names of them because you don't have a lot of space, like project A, project B. I think it's better just to select 5 of them, the ones that are either more recent or the ones that are more relevant, and then add like one line, couple of lines about that specific project. Um, these lines should tell something about what your job was, what technology you were using, for example, or your level of responsibility in that project. So you can see there on this slide that I included an example of my own resume, the one that I've been using this last couple of months to interview. So on the right side of the resume, I added the professional experience, and for each one, I included 2, 3 lines, as I said, about what that experience, like why that experience is relevant. Um, and for the job that I'm looking for in this case was iOS software engineer, why that position was relevant and what are the things that I was doing. Um, so for example, to give you an example, I would think something like, okay, I worked with Java some years ago. I have experience with it. I'm adding that to my resume. But then I asked to myself, like, do I want them to ask me about Java? Right now, that's not like my role. Right now, it's not using that language. It's not using Java. So do I want them to ask me about that? No. Is that relevant to me anymore? No, it isn't. So that's not one of my strengths at this moment. And since I don't think it's interesting to talk about that for this job, then I will remove it from my resume. Of course, if at any moment they ask me about, hey, so what other programming languages do you know? Then I can talk about that, but I don't want to have that highlighted on my resume. So that's just an example. If we move um, to the next slide, um, the other thing apart from your resume, it's the tracking tool. I never thought about this before I started interviewing, and I found it like so useful. This part like has given me a lot of peace of mind while I was interviewing and has saved me a lot of time. The goal here is to have all the information that you need in one place and like to reduce your stress level during the process. Even more now that we are working from home and we don't have that other references. So in the beginning, it's usually like really easy to remember the roles, the companies in which you applied, but as days go by, it becomes more and more difficult to have everything in your mind and to remember all the details. Even more if it's a process, for example, that I did a lot of interviews because I wasn't sure of what I was looking for in the beginning. So it took me almost 2 months. So I couldn't remember everything. So using a tool to have that information was really useful. Um, so you can create to this, you can use different tools, like you can create just a document, spreadsheet, you can use an application like Notion, Evernote, or any other tool like these ones. I personally used Notion. I really like that tool, and for this scenario, it worked great. So in this slide, as you can see on the right side, I added an example of how this can be used using Notion. But the purpose of this tool, whichever you use, is to have like an entry for each one of the jobs that and have there all the relevant information, like and as I included there in this on this slide. Um, of course, the name of the company, then, for example, you can include the status you are with that company. For example, okay, resume sent, or phone screening, or I'm at the onsite. I have the onsite scheduled, or I already received an offer from this company. Then another data that you can add is the date for your next interview or call, for example. In this case, for example, Notion, you can then display all these dates in the calendar. Um, then, of course, the contact information for your recruiter, like the name, the email, the phone. That has been useful to me because I'm really bad with names. Also, when your email inbox starts like filling up with a lot of emails, it's easier just to do a search for a specific name or a specific email. Another thing maybe that you can do is creating a tag for each company on your email tool like Gmail, and then label your emails by company. So it's easier for you when you see all your emails. It's easier for you to see what are the emails of each company, because you will end up with different email threads, and it's kind of confusing just to see everything that's going on. So the other pieces of information to include are the notes, the questions, and the personal pitch. I recommend starting with the questions. I recommend preparing the questions you want to ask ahead of time. The purpose of these questions is to help you understand how the company works, the role, and any other criteria that is relevant to you. You need to think about the key aspects that you want to evaluate for each, like from these companies or roles, and make sure that you list all of your questions so you don't forget any of them. And in the end, you have all your questions answered, and you have the criteria to do, like to make and have your decision. So some examples of questions that I personally found interesting, for example, like what are the steps of the interview process? You would usually ask that to your recruiter. Or what is the size of the team? What are the opportunities for growth in the team? What are the last projects the team has been working on? Or how is the team culture? What what technologies or frameworks do you use? Whatever you really want to know. So apart from that, when you talk with the recruiter, you should take notes, for example, about the answers of some of those questions, like what they are looking for in the role, what are the steps of the interview process, the location of the job, and so on. Any any details that you need to remember. If you talk with the hiring manager, you do the same. Like take notes of all the things that you think they are important, they are relevant, and the answers of the questions that you're asking these people. Um, because, for example, you will talk with your recruiter several times, with the hiring manager at least once, but sometimes more than once. And I personally don't like asking the same questions, even less to the same person, only because I had forgotten my answers. I don't think that gives like a good impression of you. Um, so that's why I took notes of the questions I had already asked and their answers. Another reason why this is useful is to engage in a more personalized conversation with that person. So, for example, you can review your notes and see that the last time that you talk with the hiring manager, you talk about a specific topic. So, in your next conversation, you can mention that and you can say, hey, so last time you mentioned that the team is growing a lot this year. Could you tell me more about that? What are the challenges when the team grows so fast? Um, to have this more follow-up engaging conversation that just rather than just be there talking with this person and then trying to remember how was your last conversation, like what's this role for this thing, did they tell me that this role was for this other thing. So it's better to have everything in notes. So as a summary, like I consider very useful going back to your notes, because when you talk with different companies and people, it's difficult to remember everything. So the last part is your personal pitch of the information that you need to have for each company. So you will introduce yourself multiple times, like in each one of your interviews. So you already know this, then prepare what to say in your introduction. It has to be short, like a summary of your most recent experience and responsibilities. Um, and don't forget to mention what you are looking for. It's a good moment to mention that you're really passionate about the company and to give your reasons why you want to work for that company. That's also going to make your pitch more personalized for that company. And I think that that's something positive to show to your interviewer. Um, so, for example, if it's a company in the same area as your previous job, say, for example, finance, you could add to your pitch something like, I have 2 years of experience working on finance. I can bring that experience to this company, which is a great fit for me. So that way you have a personalized pitch for that company and they can really feel that you're really interested in them and that you are a good fit for them. Um, Another example, for example, like maybe your reason to work for that company is because you really like their product, even if you don't have a previous experience similar to that. Maybe if that's the case, you could add to your pitch something like, I'm I'm really passionate about your product and I love to contribute to your company's vision. Okay, so that brings me to the next slide, which is the research. To prepare better questions and to prepare your conversations with the different interviewers and the hiring manager, you need to become familiar with the company. Um, Things like the company vision, what are their latest products that they have just launched, what are their open source projects, their different locations, offices. Try, of course, try to use their website, try to use their mobile app. That was for my case. Um, you can then prepare some questions related to these things. This again is going to help you to show your interest in the company. And it's going to differentiate you from other candidates that maybe ask more generic questions and that they don't show any special interest for the company. So, for example, questions like, oh, I see that you just launched this product. How long have you been working on it? Or I see that you have some projects on GitHub. How do you decide if a project is going to be open source? Uh, there is no need to go crazy with this research, but it's just enough that you can comment and talk about things specific to that company. So moving forward, if you can go to the next slide, that's like the preparation part, and now like the process of the interviews itself. So the process starts with a call with the recruiter or any like person that it's like the point of contact for that company. This is an easy call. Is to learn about the role, and how the interview process is structured. They can ask you about your career goals, what are you looking for in your next position. You can also talk about your timing, like if you are ready to move to the technical interviews or if you prefer waiting a couple of weeks, if you are studying and you finish in 1 month. Like this call is to talk about these things, like the timing, the structure, and what are you looking for. So the next step is the one that is more different between companies, which is like the technical or maybe like the most common is the technical phone interview, like a phone screening. This could be also like a take-home assignment that they give you a project and you have 2 or 3 days maybe to send to build that and send it back. It could also be like a codility challenge that you also do like in 1 hour, a couple of hours when you have the time. So the technical phone screen, like the technical interview, it's a coding challenge, or depending on your area, it could be more specific. As I said, for example, in my case, uh, some of them were like building a small mobile application during the interview. So for these interviews, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's really important the communication. I can go briefly on this. And if you have questions, again, if you have questions more for the technical part, just let me know during the Q&A. So from my experience, of course, it's important to resolve the problem, but it's also important to like how you express your thoughts. The strategy that I followed was, and this, I learned a lot about this using prompt and doing my fake interviews, because in the beginning, I didn't know how to even begin. Like I was just jumping to the code. So what I learned is that, okay, first step is ask questions. What are the inputs? What's the output, and any assumptions that you want to make? Like, for example, like, could I receive a nil as an entry? Could I receive an empty? an empty array, for example, things like that. So a good idea is to write some examples of inputs and what's the expected output. It will also help you to find any corner cases. Um, After that, the second step is to talk about the ideas that come into your mind, whatever it is. Any idea that's better than just stay silent. It's okay to give a naive solution first. The interviewer will help you with this. Like, if you don't say anything, the interview won't be able to help you. So better just to give a solution, even if it's not a good, perfect solution. And then you can analyze your solution and trying to think a better approach. The key is communicate your thoughts and be able to understand the advantages of a specific approach compared to another. Um, be able to analyze its complexity and like to do this comparison. I think that's really important and that interviewers really value that, even if you don't have time to finish the whole problem. Usually you will have like 40 minutes maximum to resolve the problems. So sometimes they don't even expect you to finish everything, but they want to see how you think and how you approach the problem and how you try to find a solution. And the third part, of course, is the coding part, like talk and describe what you're doing. Yeah, as I said, don't worry if you don't have time to have everything like building and running. If you did a good job describing your solution and coding most of it, that's usually fine. With this, then you will eventually reach the on-site stage. So this consists of a series of 4 to 6 interviews, depending on the company, and typically, like usually during the same day. So in this step is when you like when we find the main differences. So this on-site loop usually took place in the company's offices. You would like go there, spend the day there in one of their meeting rooms, doing an interview after the other, maybe with a lunch break. But now with the sheltering at place, working from home, this process is not possible. So the other steps, they are the same. This step is the one that really changes. So now these on-sites are now done virtually. So they become really similar to a phone screening to the previous step. So I wanted to mention some recommendations for these interviews, virtual or not. Um, and then I will move ahead and talk about the differences. So the recruiter will give you the details of your interviews, or if they don't so, ask for those details because they will usually tell you like how many interviews you're going to be doing and what's the goal of each one of them. If it's a coding challenge, if it's a system design interview, or any other type of interview, they will usually provide you that information. Um, and talking again about the importance of your personal pitch here, and the importance of your questions here is that when you need to introduce yourself every time for each interview, and also what I like is engaging in this interesting conversation with my interviewer. Um, I think that's a way of enjoying the conversation. So I used to adapt my questions to my interviewer, not only to the company, but also to the interviewer. So you need to pay attention when the interviewers are introducing themselves. They usually mention things like their teams, what's the current projects they're working on, or even a bit of their background of their career. So instead of asking, a generic question like, okay, what does your typical day look like? That's one of the questions that when you search in Google, like questions for your interviews, that's the question. So instead of doing that, you can ask something specific to that person. So for example, if they mention that they used to work on a different team at the same company, you can ask, okay, how does this team compares to the previous one? So, or if they mention that they work in a product oriented team, you can ask, okay, so how do you work with PMs? How do you work with designers? What's your process in the team? So the goal is to be in a conversation from which you can learn about the team and the company, but at the same time, a conversation that engages your interviewer. Um, Another example that I also used sometimes is when one of the interviewers mentioned that they are working in a new technology or that they are using a specific tool. So then, in another interview with your next interviewer, you can ask about that. So it's a resource again to show your interest in the company and to have those personal questions for that company and for that team. So, and the next question is then how the technical interviews work while being at home. So I found like three different types of technical interviews. The first one is by using like a shared document or a tool like CoderPad, where you share this coding pad, your this coding screen, and you code there and the other person can see what you're doing. So for this case, you aren't using any whiteboard or anything. So be prepared for this. When you, before, when you did these interviews at their office, you had a whiteboard and you could talk about the problem on the whiteboard. But now that we are at home, you don't have the whiteboard anymore. So if you're using a tool like CoderPad, try to practice how to write your thoughts in a tool like CoderPad, where you can draw your solution. And as I said earlier, this part is important. Do not jump into coding directly, even if you're in CoderPad. Type first, like, what are your requirements? And the inputs, some pseudocode, everything as text and not as you would do in a whiteboard. So be aware of that. The second type of technical interview is by sharing your whole screen. Um, Not sure if all the fields do that. For my case, which was mobile development, I had some interviews where I needed to share my whole screen. So it was, for example, to share my Xcode. I would open Xcode in my screen and then share the screen with them to have Xcode and the mobile, like the iPhone simulator, also there. So for example, in this case, you have to create a project and build some requirements while the other person can see everything you are doing. So it's important that your computer is prepared for this interview. So make sure that you don't have anything open like messaging apps that could be a distraction, or no open tabs with random things. Like close everything that it's not related to your interview. The third type of interview that maybe don't require coding, but you need to discuss about an architecture or system design. So for these ones, I found different, like companies use different tools. The recruiter or will send you some preparation document, and there you can see like they will give you details of how they do these interviews. So for some of them, they shared like a presentation with me, like PowerPoint, like a Google PowerPoint shared with me, and I would use that. Another option is there are some drawing tools that you can also share what you are like similar to CoderPad, but drawing. So if this is the case, you can ask like the recruiter what is the tool that they use for doing these interviews. So you can take a look before your interview, so you get familiar with the tool. You know how to write text, you know how to draw boxes and things like that. So you don't feel that that's a problem when you are actually doing the interview. A trick that I learned from a friend and that I used a couple of times in my interviews is, for example, if you have an iPad or a tablet, you can connect that to your computer so the screen of your tablet is visible on your computer, and then you can share that window with the interviewer. I use this for some system design interviews because it's really easy to draw on your iPad, as if it's more similar to using a whiteboard rather than being with your mouse trying to draw things. So that's a trick that if you have that option, maybe you can use it if you prefer it that way. So moving to the next slide, this is the last part of the presentation. Um, so I wanted to talk about what are the best things and the disadvantages of doing virtual on-sites, apart from the things that I already mentioned about the technical type of interviews. So starting with the negative aspects, while doing a virtual interview, you can sometimes face technical issues. This has happened to me. Like, I live in the city, I have a good internet connection, and I thought like I wouldn't have any problems, but I was wrong because things can happen. Like, never, like, I never have any issues, but when I was doing interviews, I had issues. So during one of my interviews, I lost the internet connection at my apartment, and I ended up using the Wi-Fi hotspot in my phone to connect my computer to my phone and then finish my interview. The other issue that I had, that it wasn't my fault, it's like the meeting link wasn't like configured properly, and I couldn't join. Um, so I really panicked in that moment because I didn't know what to do. In the end, it was a CoderPad interview, so I had the CoderPad link. So I joined CoderPad and I typed to my interviewer, like, hey, I'm connected, but I can't join the meeting room, please, like, I'm trying to fix it. So like, to overcome this, like, these things can happen. So my recommendation is to be resolutive when something like this happens and to think about a backup plan. So for example, try to have your phone at hand, or if you have a tablet, it can help you too. um, Maybe check how you could connect your to a meeting using your phone instead of the computer. There are some conference tools where you can call a number and you can join the meeting from your phone. So check those things in case something happens, you know, like, what else you can do. And also, like, if you have that tracking tool that I mentioned in the beginning, have your recruiter information ready in case you need to reach them, in case you need to call them, write them an email about any issues. So that way they can try to help you. The second challenge is to find a quiet space at home with no interruptions, even more if you have kids or pets. So the ideal situation is to have like a working dedicated space at home with your desk, a comfortable chair. But for example, this was a challenge for me because I don't have a space like that. Um, Also, if at home, if you live with other people or family, you could have interruptions like that you wouldn't encounter in the office space. So these challenges could mean that you may lose your concentration and that you're not as focused as you would be in an office space. Um, Even if you are not interrupted, maybe you could be like hearing in other room like noises from your kids, from your pets, and that's distracting. A different negative aspect is missing the human interaction. I think that communication in a video conference, you are losing that closeness and the opportunity to have eye contact with that person. And body language is really important during communication, and eye contact is a key factor. It shows honesty, confidence is a sign that you're really listening to the other person. So it helps building trust. All of this body language is lost in a virtual video conference. So to overcome this, try to look at the camera from time to time, try to smile, try to nod with your head like you are listening. Try not to look, of course, try not to look down the whole time, like you are not even looking at the camera or not at the screen, or don't spend a lot of time like looking to the side, like if you were distracted by something that is happening out of your computer. The last disadvantage is that you can't see the office environment. I think it's really fun and interesting to be in person in the office, see how desks are distributed, how people work, if they interact between each other, or if they are like all with sad faces on at their desk on their own. Um, Teams also like decorating their office spaces with things related to the team, internal jokes. So that's information that you are going to miss. In a virtual on-site, the other person is going to be at home, so you don't have any information at all. There's not much that you can do about this. Just try to ask about the company culture, team culture, but you won't get that office feeling in this case. But there are some positive aspects. The first one is that you are doing the interviews in your familiar environment, your home. You're also using your own laptop, so you are familiar with your keyboard, your shortcuts, and all these things. Um, you are in your safe space, and that gives you confidence. From my experience, the whole situation feels more relaxed when you are doing on-site uh, at the office. You're in a place where you don't know anyone. You spend the whole day in a meeting room that it's like really work oriented, so you can really feel the pressure. But at home, it's more friendly. One trick could be to decorate your space, your room, with motivational sentences or images that inspire you, photos, whatever is going to help you to feel more relaxed at your space. Um, this is related to your nerves, the nerves that you may have during the interviews. At home, your pressure is lower, so it's easier for you to control your nerves. Also, because of the body language that I mentioned, you have limited body language, which is bad for some things, as I mentioned, but is an advantage for some other things. Um, for example, if under stress your hands are sweaty, you start playing with your hands, with a pen, your bottle. All these movements or signs won't be noticed in this case. So also if you find it difficult to talk, to look at the eyes when you're talking to someone that you don't know, then a virtual interview is going to be an advantage too. The next point is the level of exhaustion. Doing an on-site virtual or not, it's really tiring. You are working under pressure for at least 4 hours, answering questions, coding. So in a virtual on-site, you have the advantage that when your day is over, you are already at home. So you can go and take a shower, have some rest, eat something immediately. Uh, and then disconnect uh, and be prepared for your next day. So no need to do any commute, no need to spend 1 hour to get home. Same when you start your day. You don't need to travel to the office thinking that, oh, I need to leave 1 hour earlier because I don't want to be late. And these like those extra worries. The another advantage is that you have your notes between your interviews. If you have a break, you can go back to your notes to review something, read the questions that you want to ask, or even take notes about some of the things that you think they are important. But I don't recommend reading your notes while you are in the interview because that's not going to help you to stay focused. I find it more distracting than helpful. And the last thing is the option of distributing the interviews in different days. Um, this I'm not sure if all companies do this. Some of them, like the ones with I interview with, some of them gave me this option. So you can choose to split your on-site instead of doing 5 interviews in a day, split it in 2 different days, then be like more relaxed. So if you have other responsibilities, this is an advantage. I personally prefer doing it like doing all of them the same day because then I can be done with it. But this depends on your personal preference. Okay, so yeah, if you go to the next slide, that was everything I wanted to share with you. So I'm ready to jump into if you have any questions for me.
Yes, pulling those up right now. Mhm.
Okay, I see the questions. So the first one is, are there important questions you think we should ask potential employers about working from home? Yeah, definitely. I always ask about this because right now it's important and during the next months. So I always ask about what is their policy right now of when until when we are going to be working from home. uh, this wasn't really useful. I ask this question every time, but it wasn't useful because they don't know, like the companies don't know. Most of them, they just mention, yeah, until the end of 2020. But we don't know until when. So, like, there was some kind of general common response. Other things that I would ask is the flexibility, like could I be working from home from wherever I want, or should I be in California, for example, or in a specific place, or if I could be working from anywhere. And I would also ask about not only thinking about my working from home, but how the team are working from home. I usually ask about what are the challenges that you are facing now that you are working from home, and what are the things that you are doing to overcome that. So, for example, like if you used to have like happy hours and things like that, are you doing now to to like replace that? What type of things you're doing? And there were some really interesting answers related to that, that I really found really interesting. There are companies that they're not really doing a lot, but there are some of them that really care about working from home and are really like organizing a lot of different things. And that's also like a sign of a good company and team culture. Um, so asking about that can give you more information that you think than just working from home, right? It can give you a sense of how's the culture at that team and at that company. So next question, can you talk more about Latinas in tech? Yeah, so this is a group that I got to know like 4 or 5 years ago. The goal was just to have like a group of Latina women get in touch and have some fun time together, share their experiences about what are the challenges of being a woman working in tech, being a Latina, Latino working in tech, and share like the experiences. Um, it was great and it kept growing and growing. They start doing the panels, doing some sessions, and there was a moment like 3 years ago, they decided to create an annual conference that they organize every year with a lot of speakers, a lot of there are companies that go there if you're looking for a job. For example, you have different companies booths. It's pretty interesting. Apart from that, you can go to our website. If you look for Latinas in Tech, you can connect with people there, with other Latinas. We have a a job like board there. So if you're looking for a job, you can go and check all the postings that we have uh, of job offers from our partners and other companies. Um, we are also in Slack. So if you join our Slack channel, you can find other people there, other Latinas, and connect, ask questions if you need any mentorship, for example. I think that's one of the things that I really enjoy, and we really put our effort as Latinas trying to have that mentorship support and help any other Latinas that are in tech. Okay, next question. How can I improve if I fail an interview really bad? So that happens. Like you can have a really bad day and have a really bad interview, but that doesn't mean that uh, you can't do it better. Like everyone, like that's something that can happen to everyone at any day. So try to analyze why that happened. If it was maybe because it was a question that you didn't understand, so maybe if you identify that, you can try to ask more questions for your next interview. Or maybe you realize that the problem was that you were too slow while coding, for example. So try to work on that. Um, or maybe you realize that your communication wasn't that good, that you really didn't see that the interviewer was understanding everything that you were mentioning, because I find it hard to put your ideas into words that could be something complicated, even more if it's related to tech. Um, so identify what are the things that you could do better, and maybe like use a tool like prompt. Maybe you can do an interview with a friend, with your mentor. You can try and find a mentor for your interviews. That could also be like a good advice, and so this person can help you to see how you can improve. And then, of course, ask feedback to the company. As I said, sometimes they won't give you any details, but if they do, it can be really it can be really useful. Um, yeah, but I guess the important thing is just to stay positive, that it's something that happens just one time, and the next day you're going to do better. That's the basic. Like, it's sometimes it's your mindset, right? What you need to change. So okay, another question is, should I apply to big companies first, or should I get practice doing some interviews with smaller companies? So that's a good trick to start doing interviews with smaller companies. So I think it could be at some point useful to get rid of those nerves while doing interviews, but be aware that sometimes the interviews process are different. Like, smaller companies are going to be looking for things really specific, and maybe bigger companies, they have a more generic interview. So it's good to practice if you really want to practice your communication, or how to deal with your nerves, and all these things. But for the specific questions, not sure if that's useful, because they are usually like really different. Um, but yeah, I mean, of course, like, like, if you keep practicing, you're going to get better. And that's it. Like, the first interviews that I did, they weren't as good as the last ones that I did. Um, you really get better with time. So yeah, definitely you can start practicing with some smaller companies, then move to the ones that you really find interesting. But keep in mind that sometimes their processes could be different. And then the other question, is there anything in this interview process that you would do differently? Is there anything you would do different in your career? Okay, so for the interview process, yeah, what I would do differently is stop first when before starting applying for jobs. Make sure what I wanted to be looking like. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. So I started applying for different companies, like companies that were smaller, companies that were bigger, companies that were focused on commerce, companies that were focused more on social. So a lot of different things. The first reason why I did that is because I thought I didn't know how I was going to perform in the interview. So I was like, okay, the more interviews I do, the more options I have to find a job. But what happened is that I couldn't keep up with everything. I had a lot of interviews in my calendar, and I didn't really have the time to prepare for the interviews that I really cared about. So it was unnecessarily stressful for me. So what I would do different is, first, be really sure about the companies that I really wanted to be interviewing with, and discard the other ones because they were like draining my energy. It was too much. And then in my career, I guess that I wouldn't do anything differently because, of course, now I know more things and I have more confidence. But that is something that you reach to that point because of all the things that you did in the past. So for me, I grew up in Spain. For me, it was really difficult to think that I could come here to the US, work with the biggest companies in the world. Like, that was something that it was out of my scope when I was growing in Spain. So I'm really happy that I got to be here, and I try to be thankful for that. And I was really insecure when I started my career. Of course, I would do some things different, but that was part of the learning process. So better to appreciate what I have, instead of thinking like, why would I done differently, and trying to and regret things and decisions. Is there anything you wished you knew before when you were looking for your first job? Yeah, I wish I knew like some of the things that I told you about, like how to face a technical interview, because I used to just jump into the code at first. I didn't care a lot about the communication. So I learned that after I did some interviews. Some other things. Well, this mentions specifically like the question for my first job. That was a long time ago. My first job was in Spain, and it was kind of a different experience. But yeah, focusing on this process right now, during this interview process that I just had. Um, and as I said, I wish I knew before that like the interviews are really tiring, so I should have focused my energy more on the things that I really care about and the companies that were my preference. Did did you arrive in the US with a job, or you came to the US to doing the interviews? I came with a job. Well, it was more like an internship. This was 6 years ago. I came to the US with a program called Jóvenes con Futuro. It's a Spanish program that helps engineers to find a job in the US, and the goal is to do like your first internship in the US. So when I came, it was an internship with a startup, and then I move ahead, work with a bigger company, and that's how in the end, I stayed. But I know some friends that they have done interviews without having a working permit in the US. They did their interviews back in Spain, for example, and they did all their interviews from there. And if they do like well enough, then they will figure out the visa thing and the work permit thing, and travel here. It's a challenge, of course. It's a challenge, even more if you don't know the culture, if you don't know how the interview process works. But it's something that it can be done, because I know people that have done it in the past. So yeah. Okay.
Well,
I don't see any more
perfect.
questions.
Yes. It looks like that might be all the questions we have at the moment. Um, but yeah, no, absolutely. This was awesome. I learned a lot too. This is actually very useful information. But just like everything else here, I think the students really appreciate it. The questions were really important and very
Mhm.
on topic. Um, but yeah, once again, we'd like to thank you for joining us today and taking part of our Women Speaker Series. Once again, congratulations on your new position. Uh,
Thanks.
so we're
Well,
very
thanks.
excited to see our upcoming students going to that same path and landing that same job.
Yeah, yeah. Feel free like to look for my name and reach out, LinkedIn or whatever, if you have any more questions. And thanks for inviting me. Like. I think it's great sharing my experience, because I was doing that like 2 weeks ago. So
Absolutely. No, well, once again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see everyone else on the next